I heard my daughter-in-law say, "The $1 million inheritance is ours. She's too old to spend the money." So I voided the will and left everything to my older daughter, the one my daughter-in-law hated. The day after the funeral, my son went to the bank to claim his fortune. The manager raised his hand, and I appeared with the news. "Glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment what city you're watching from. That way, I'll see how far my story has reached. My name is Mary, and I am 66 years old. All my life, I believed I had raised a good son. Michael was my pride, my only real connection to the future after I lost my husband Robert 20 years ago. But that Thursday morning, while waiting in Dr. Smith's office for my routine checkup, I heard words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. I had arrived early for my appointment, as I always do. The office was almost empty, with just a few chairs occupied in the waiting room. I sat near the window, flipping through an old magazine, when I heard a familiar voice in the hallway. It was Rebecca, my daughter-in-law. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Perhaps she had an appointment with a specialist in the same building. But then I heard her talking on the phone, and the words coming out of her mouth chilled my blood. "The will is rightfully ours, Jessica," she was saying with that sweet voice she always used when she wanted something. "Mary is already 66. She's too old to spend that amount of money. $1 million wasted on an old lady who barely leaves her house." I felt as if someone had punched me in the stomach. Jessica was her younger sister. She had always been just as ambitious as Rebecca. But hearing my own daughter-in-law talk about me as if I were an obstacle to their fortune left me breathless. "Michael is completely on board," Rebecca continued. And those words were like daggers. "He says his mum is never going to change the will anyway. She's too attached to it to leave it to Sarah." She laughed, a cold laugh I had never heard before. "That bitter older daughter of hers doesn't even visit anymore. We are her only real family." My hand trembled as I gripped the edge of the chair. Sarah, my older daughter, had been gradually estranged from our family life ever since Rebecca entered the picture 5 years ago. I always thought they were natural differences between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, normal conflicts that would resolve over time. I never imagined it had been deliberate. "The plan is simple," Rebecca went on, lowering her voice, but not enough for me to miss it from where I was sitting. "We are going to be more insistent about the will. Michael is going to start suggesting that Mary should organize her affairs while she is still lucid. You know, for her own good." I closed my eyes, feeling the tears start to form. For the past few months, Michael had been casually mentioning topics about financial planning, about the importance of having everything in order. I had thought it was because he was concerned about my well-being. How naive I had been. "Jessica, you don't understand," Rebecca continued. "This woman sits in that huge house every day, counting her money like a dragon on its treasure. Meanwhile, Michael and I can barely afford the mortgage on our apartment. It's unfair." Unfair. That word resonated in my mind like a funeral bell. I had worked for 40 years as a nurse. I had saved every penny after my husband died. I had lived modestly to make sure my children had something when I was gone. And now my own daughter-in-law called it unfair. "Besides," Rebecca added dismissively, "what is Mary going to do with $1 million? Buy more cardigans? More cat food? It's ridiculous. We could use that money to truly live, to give our children a good life." Our children. Rebecca was 3 months pregnant, a detail that made everything even more painful. I was going to be a grandmother, and my daughter-in-law was already counting my inheritance as if it were hers. The nurse called my name then. "Mrs. Smith?" I raised my hand automatically, even though my last name was Johnson. My mind was so jumbled I couldn't even remember my own name. I rose with shaky legs and walked into the office. but I couldn't focus on anything the doctor was telling me. His words about blood pressure and blood tests faded into the background as I processed what I had just heard. When I left the office an hour later, Rebecca was gone. I drove home on autopilot, my hands clutching the steering wheel as I tried to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. Arriving home, I sat in my favorite chair by the living room window, the same one where I had cried when my husband died, where I had celebrated when Michael graduated from college. Now it was where I would have to face the reality that the son I had raised with so much love saw me only as a source of money. The phone rang. It was Michael. "Hi, Mum," he said, with that affectionate voice that now sounded false. "How was your doctor's appointment?" "Fine," I answered automatically, my voice sounding strange even to myself. "That's good. Hey, Rebecca and I were thinking, maybe we should sit down soon and talk about, you know, getting your important papers organized, just to make sure everything is in order." There it was, exactly as Rebecca had predicted. My son executing their plan like an actor following a script. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake until 3 o'clock in the morning, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, reliving every moment of my phone conversation with Michael. Every word he had said, every pause, every inflection in his voice now carried a completely different meaning. "Just to make sure everything is in order," he had repeated before hanging up, as if I were a senile old woman incapable of handling my own affairs, as if it were his responsibility to take care of me, when in reality he only wanted to take care of my money. I got up and walked through the house, touching the things I had accumulated during 40 years of adult life. The dining room table where Michael had done his homework every afternoon, the piano where Sarah had practiced for hours, until Rebecca suggested that maybe it was time to get rid of those old, space-consuming things. Now I understood why Sarah had stopped coming over. It wasn't because she was too busy with her job as a teacher, as I had thought. It was because Rebecca had made her feel uncomfortable in her own family home. I remembered the last time Sarah had come for dinner, 6 months ago. Rebecca had made pointed comments about her single lifestyle and suggested that Sarah should find a man to take care of her instead of depending on Mum for everything. Sarah had left early that night, and I had thought she was being too sensitive. How blind I had been. Rebecca had been systematically pushing Sarah away from me, making sure Michael was my only available heir. On Friday morning, Michael called again. This time he wanted to come over for lunch with Rebecca. "We want to talk to you about some important things, Mum," he said. "Rebecca has been looking into some fantastic options for estate planning. There are ways to protect your money, so you don't have to worry about a thing." "Protect my money? From whom exactly?" "All right," I told him, my voice sounding stronger than I felt. "Come over." I spent the morning cooking Michael's favourite lunch, roast turkey with mashed potatoes and vegetables. As I peeled the potatoes, my hands trembled, remembering all the times I had cooked this same meal for him as a child, when he was sick, when he was heartbroken over some teenage girlfriend. I had put so much love into every meal, every bit of care, every sacrifice. After his father died, I worked double shifts at the hospital to pay for his college. I sold my car and took the bus for 2 years to afford his books. I gave up my own dreams of traveling, saving the house, having a social life, all to make sure he had the best opportunities. And now he and his wife were sitting in my living room, waiting for me to die so they could spend my money. They arrived at 12 o'clock. Rebecca was wearing a new dress that cost at least $300, by my estimate. Her shoes were designer. Her purse had that expensive label I'd seen in magazines. For someone who supposedly couldn't pay their mortgage, she certainly dressed well. Michael hugged me as always, and for a moment, just a moment, I forgot what I knew. He was my boy, my baby who had grown up and become a successful man. But then I saw the look he exchanged with Rebecca, a look that said, "Let's stick to the plan," and reality returned like a slap. During lunch, Rebecca praised my cooking excessively. "Mary, you're an amazing cook. It's a shame you only cook for yourself most of the time." A subtle jab reminding me of my loneliness. Michael kept the conversation light at first, asking about my health, my neighbors, my activities, but I could see the impatience in his eyes. He was waiting for the right moment to bring up the subject that had truly brought them here. Finally, after dessert, Rebecca put her hand on mine. "Mary, Michael and I have been talking, and we're concerned about you being here alone with so many financial responsibilities. It must be very stressful to manage all those accounts and investments by yourself. I had been managing my finances perfectly for 20 years, but I didn't say anything. We've been thinking," Michael continued, "that maybe it would be a good idea to set up a few things so that if something were to happen to you, everything would be organized. You know, power of attorney, that kind of thing, for your peace of mind." My peace of mind, as if the problem was my tranquility and not their greed. "Also," Rebecca added with that sweet smile I now recognized as pure poison, "we think you might consider moving into something smaller. This house is too big for one person, and we could help you find a lovely, more manageable place." There it was. They wanted me to sell the house. The house where I had raised my children, where I had lived with my husband, where all my memories were. They wanted to turn it into money they could control. I looked at the two of them, sitting at my table, eating my food, planning my future as if I were a child incapable of making decisions. And in that moment, something inside me changed. It wasn't just sadness I felt anymore. It was something colder, more determined. "I'll think about it," I finally told them. Michael smiled, clearly satisfied. "That's all we ask, Mum. We just want the best for you." After they left, I sat in my living room and cried. I cried for the son I thought I had raised. I cried for the years of sacrifice that apparently hadn't meant anything. I cried for the family I thought I had. But when I ran out of tears, something else began to grow in their place. A cold, clear resolution. If they wanted to play this game, I could play it too. On Monday morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. All weekend I had been thinking, planning, remembering things I had overlooked. I was no longer the naive woman I had been the previous Thursday. Rebecca's conversation had opened my eyes in a way I could never close them again. The first thing I did was call the law firm Smith & Associates. Harold Smith had been my husband's lawyer for years, and after his death, he had become my trusted legal advisor. He was an honest man of 72, with enough experience to understand exactly what I needed to do. "Mary," he told me when I walked into his office that afternoon, "you look different, more determined." "Harold, I need to revoke my current will," I told him without preamble, "and I need to do it in a way that no one can legally question." His eyebrows raised. "May I ask what has precipitated this decision?" I told him everything, every word I had heard from Rebecca, every manipulation I could now see clearly, every red flag I had ignored. Harold listened in silence, occasionally taking notes, his expression becoming more serious with every detail. "Mary, what you are describing is a form of emotional financial abuse," he finally said. "Unfortunately, it is more common than people think. Older adults are especially vulnerable to this type of manipulation by family members." "What options do I have?" I asked. Harold leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully. "First, we can completely revoke your current will and create a new one. Second, we can set up safeguards to ensure your new will cannot be contested on grounds of mental capacity. And third," he paused, We could consider some more creative strategies. What kind of strategies? Well, if you truly want to teach them a lesson about the consequences of greed, there are legal ways to do it. But I need you to be absolutely sure this is what you want to do. I thought of Rebecca laughing as she talked about me as if I were an obstacle. I thought of Michael planning my future as if I had no say in it. I thought of Sarah, my older daughter, whom they had systematically pushed away from my life. I'm sure, I told him. For the next 2 hours, Harold and I worked out the details. The new will would leave everything to Sarah. The house, the investments, the savings accounts, everything. Michael would receive exactly $1, the minimum amount required by law, so he couldn't claim he had been accidentally forgotten. But that was just the first step of the plan. Harold, I told him, there's something else I need to do. I need to reconnect with Sarah, but without Rebecca knowing. That night, I called Sarah for the first time in months. Her voice sounded surprised to hear my number on her phone. Mum, is everything okay? Sarah, my daughter, I need to see you. I need to explain some things I've been blind to seeing. We met the next day at a small coffee shop across town, far from anywhere Michael and Rebecca might see us. Sarah arrived dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, so different from Rebecca's expensive outfits. But she looked beautiful, authentic, real. Mum, I'm so glad you called, she said, taking my hand across the table. I've missed our talks. Sarah, I have to apologize for a lot of things, I began, and I have to tell you some truths you should have known a long time ago. I told her everything, Rebecca's conversation, Michael's plans, the way they had been manipulating the family situation for years. As I spoke, I saw tears form in Sarah's eyes. Mum, I knew something was going on, she told me. Every time I came to visit you, Rebecca found ways to make me feel uncomfortable. Little comments about my life, about my choices, about the fact that I'm not married. And Michael never defended me. Why did you never tell me anything? Sarah sighed. Because I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I was too critical, too difficult. And when the visits became so tense, I thought it was better to stay away so as not to cause trouble. My heart broke hearing this. My own daughter had pulled away to protect my happiness, while Rebecca had been using that absence to strengthen her position as the devoted daughter-in-law. Sarah, there's something else you need to know, I told her. I've changed my will. Everything is going to you. Her eyes widened. Mum, you can't do that just out of anger. Michael is your son too. It's not out of anger, my dear. It's for justice. Michael made his choice when he decided to see me as a source of money instead of as his mother. But more important than that, I need you to understand that this is only part of a bigger plan. I explained what Harold and I had designed. Sarah listened with a mix of shock and growing admiration. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked me. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Over the next few days, I put the plan in motion. First, I discreetly transferred some of my largest investments to accounts that only Sarah and I knew about. This wasn't to hide money, but to ensure that funds would be immediately available to her, no matter what happened. Second, I started documenting everything. Every call from Michael about financial planning, every suggestion from Rebecca about selling the house, every subtle pressure to sign documents. Harold had explained to me that if they ever questioned my mental capacity, we would need evidence that my decisions had been carefully considered and well documented. But the hardest part of the plan required me to act like the vulnerable old woman Rebecca believed I was. I had to make them think their manipulation was working. When Michael called on Wednesday to ask if I had thought more about organizing my affairs, I told him yes. that maybe he was right about the house being too big. "That's wonderful, Mum," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "Rebecca found some really nice places we could look at this weekend." "All right, honey," I told him, forcing my voice to sound tired and confused. "I guess you know what's best." What they didn't know was that every word of that conversation was being recorded, as Harold had taught me was legal to do with my own phone calls. On Friday, Rebecca called me directly, something she rarely did. "Mary, I just wanted you to know how proud I am of you for making these difficult decisions," she said, with that sweet voice I now recognized as completely false. "I know it must be scary to think about all these changes, but Michael and I are going to take care of you. You don't have to worry about a thing." "Thank you, Rebecca," I said. "It means a lot to me to know I can trust you too." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, smiling for the first time in weeks. If they wanted to play the manipulation game, they would discover that they had severely underestimated their opponent. On Saturday morning, as I prepared for what would be one of the most important performances of my life, I received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Smith, my primary care physician for 15 years. "Mary, I hope you don't mind me calling you on the weekend," he said, "but Harold Smith contacted me yesterday. He explained your situation and asked me to call you about an idea he has." Harold had been smart to involve Dr. Smith. George Smith was not just my doctor, but also an old family friend who had known my husband since before I was married. More importantly, he was someone Michael completely trusted. "What kind of idea?" I asked, though Harold had already given me some vague details. "Well, if you really want to teach Michael and Rebecca a lesson about their true priorities, we could stage a small medical emergency. Nothing dangerous, of course, but worrisome enough to reveal their true thoughts." The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. I would experience chest pain during today's visit to the condos Rebecca had chosen. Dr. Smith would be on call at the hospital and admit me for observation. While I was in the hospital, apparently unconscious or asleep from sedatives, Michael and Rebecca would think they could talk freely about their plans. "It's completely legal," Dr. Smith assured me, "and it's not the first time I've helped a patient discover the true intentions of troublesome relatives. The only difference is that this time, we will be legally recording audio in a controlled situation." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Michael and Rebecca arrived to take me to see the lovely condos Rebecca had selected. There were 3 properties on her list, all conveniently located more than 30 minutes from my current house, all in complexes where I wouldn't know anyone, all perfect for completely isolating me. The first place was tiny, a 1-bedroom apartment with a kitchen the size of a closet. Rebecca described it as cozy and easy to maintain. Michael nodded enthusiastically, as if he truly believed I would be happy in a shoebox after living in my 4-bedroom house for 25 years. "And best of all," Rebecca added, as we walked through the claustrophobic space, "it's completely furnished. You wouldn't have to worry about moving all that old, heavy furniture from the house." Old, heavy furniture. She was referring to the antiques my husband and I had collected for years, pieces worth more than Rebecca probably imagined. At the second place, while Rebecca was talking to the real estate agent about financing options, I heard Michael make a phone call. He thought I was distracted looking at the balcony, but I could hear every word. "Yeah, it looks like Mum is going to agree to move," he was telling someone. "Rebecca thinks we could have the house on the market in 6 weeks. With the current market, we should get at least $500,000 for it." $500,000? My house was worth at least $700,000. But apparently Michael was already planning a quick sale for less money. It was then I decided it was time to implement the first phase of Dr. Smith's plan. "Ow!" I groaned softly, putting my hand to my chest. "I don't feel very well." Immediately, Rebecca was by my side, but I could see irritation in her eyes more than genuine concern. What's wrong, Mary? My chest, I said, letting my voice sound weak. I feel a pressure. Michael quickly came over, and for a moment I saw a flash of real worry in his eyes. Mum, do you need to sit down? I think I need to go to the hospital, I murmured. The drive to the hospital was revealing. While Michael drove, Rebecca muttered to herself in the passenger seat. I heard snippets. How inconvenient. And just when we were making progress. And my favourite. I hope this doesn't delay everything. Everything. As if my possible heart attack was simply a roadblock in their schedule for taking over my life. At the hospital, Dr. Smith played his part perfectly. After examining me and running some tests that we already knew would come back normal, he announced that he needed to keep me for observation overnight. Is it serious? Michael asked. And I could see genuine worry on his face, mixed with something else. Calculation. At her age, any chest pain must be taken seriously, Dr. Smith replied with professional authority. We'll monitor her for the next 12 hours to make sure she hasn't developed any complications. They gave me a private room with a bed by the window. Dr. Smith had explained that Harold had discreetly installed an audio recording device in the room, completely legal since it was my own room, and I had given explicit consent. Once I was comfortably settled in the hospital bed, pretending to be sedated by the medication, Michael and Rebecca sat in the chairs by the window to wait. The first 30 minutes were normal conversation, Rebecca calling her work to say she couldn't come in on Monday, Michael cancelling a meeting. But then, when they thought I was sound asleep, the real conversation began. Do you think this is going to delay our plans? Rebecca whispered. I don't know, Michael replied, and his voice sounded genuinely worried. But maybe we should see this as a sign that we need to speed things up. What do you mean? Michael moved closer to Rebecca, lowering his voice even further. I mean, if Mum is starting to have health problems, we need to make sure everything is sorted out before things get worse. You mean the power of attorney? That, and convincing her to sell the house as soon as possible. Rebecca, if she ends up needing long-term care, that $1 million could disappear in medical expenses very quickly. My heart sank hearing this. He wasn't worried about my well-being. He was worried about his inheritance. You're right, Rebecca agreed. Besides, if her health deteriorates, it's going to be much harder for her to make rational decisions about her future. It's better that we make these changes now, while she can still understand that it's for her own good. Exactly. And once we have the power of attorney, we can manage all her finances, making sure the money is protected. Protected. That word again, as if it were a shield against my own stupidity instead of a weapon against my autonomy. Do you think we should talk to a lawyer about speeding up the will process too? Rebecca asked. I've already thought about that, but we need to be careful. We don't want it to look like we're pressuring her, especially if Sarah decides to cause trouble later. Sarah. Even now, they were considering her a potential threat to their plans. Sarah isn't going to be a problem, Rebecca said dismissively. She doesn't even bother to visit anymore. When the time comes, it will be obvious to any judge that Michael is the dedicated son who deserves to inherit. Even so, I think we should document everything, every visit, every conversation about her finances, every time she shows confusion or indecision, just to be sure. Document my confusion, create evidence of my mental incapacity. As I lay there pretending to be asleep, I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the hospital's temperature. The conversation continued for 2 more hours, every word confirming what I already knew. To Michael and Rebecca, I was not a mother or a mother-in-law. I was an obstacle between them and an inheritance of $1 million. When they finally left that night, Promising to return in the morning, I lay awake in the hospital bed, smiling in the dark. They had revealed exactly what I needed to know, and now I had everything recorded. A week after my medical emergency, Harold, Dr. Smith, Sarah, and I met at the lawyer's office to finalize the boldest phase of our plan. What we were about to do was risky, but after listening to the recordings of Michael and Rebecca in the hospital, I knew it was necessary. Mary, Harold told me seriously, I need you to understand that once we do this, there's no turning back. They are going to find out the truth eventually, and when they do, I interrupted him, they will finally see the consequences of their actions. Harold, all my life I've been too polite, too accommodating. Michael and Rebecca have counted on that. It's time they learn that they severely underestimated their opponent. The plan was complex but elegant. Dr. Smith would report that I had suffered a massive heart attack during the early hours of Tuesday morning. Sarah would receive the devastating phone call and immediately come to the hospital. By the time Michael and Rebecca arrived, I would have already been declared dead. The hardest part, Dr. Smith explained, will be keeping this a secret long enough. We need at least 24 hours to see their true reactions before revealing the truth. Sarah took my hand. Mum, are you sure this isn't too much? They might hate you forever after this. I looked at my daughter, this beautiful, kind woman who had been manipulated into pulling away from her own family. My daughter, they already hate me. They just don't know it yet because they need my money. This is simply going to reveal what is already there. On Tuesday morning, everything began. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Dr. Smith made the official call to the hospital reporting my death. At 6 o'clock and 15 minutes, Sarah received the devastating call from the hospital. By 7 o'clock in the morning, Michael had received the news from Sarah. What followed was a performance worthy of an Academy Award by my son. It can't be, he shouted over the phone when Sarah told him. She was fine yesterday. I talked to her last night. But I knew the truth. Michael had talked to me last night to ask if I had reconsidered selling the house. Not a single question about how I felt after the hospital episode. Sarah, who was brilliantly playing her role as the devastated daughter, kept me informed of everything through coded text messages we had previously established. They arrived at the hospital, she wrote to me. Michael is crying, Rebecca is comforting him, but I saw her check her phone 3 times during the conversation with the doctor. I was hiding at Harold's house, watching everything unfold from a distance. Harold had installed discreet cameras in my house with my permission, as it was legally my property, and I had the right to monitor it. What we saw took my breath away. Michael and Rebecca arrived at my house at 9 o'clock in the morning, supposedly to pick up some personal items for the funeral. But the first thing they did was not cry or reminisce. The first thing Rebecca did was walk directly into my study and start searching through my financial files. Did you find anything? Michael asked her from the living room, where he was supposedly picking out photos for the funeral service. I'm still looking, Rebecca replied. It has to be here somewhere. Nobody keeps $1 million without having documents somewhere. $1 million. Not even a day had passed since my supposed death, and they were already hunting my money like vultures over carrion. Sarah sent me constant updates. They're in your bedroom now. Rebecca is checking your jewelry box. Michael is looking in your dresser. 2 hours later, I received a message that chilled my blood. They're arguing about speeding up the funeral for this week. Rebecca says the faster everything is, the fewer complications there will be. Speeding up the funeral. As if my death was simply an inconvenient formality that needed to be completed quickly. That afternoon, from Harold's house, I listened to the phone conversation Michael had with the funeral home. His voice sounded appropriately sad when he spoke to the director. Yes, my mother passed away this morning. he said, and he actually sounded like he was crying. I'd like to arrange something simple. She would have wanted something modest. Modest. My husband and I had been saving for years specifically to ensure we could have a dignified funeral when the time came. But apparently Michael had already decided to cut corners on that too. On Wednesday evening, Sarah came to see me at Harold's house with a full report of the day's activities. "Mum, you have to hear this," she said, pulling out her phone. "I recorded part of a conversation between Michael and Rebecca this afternoon." Rebecca's voice sounded through the speaker. "Michael, we need to get an appointment with your mother's lawyer tomorrow morning. The longer we wait, the more opportunity there is for complications to arise." "What kind of complications?" Michael had asked. "Sarah, mainly. I know she and your mother weren't close lately, but she's still her daughter. If she decides to hire her own lawyer or contest the will, we could end up in a legal battle that would cost us thousands of dollars." "You're right. I'm going to call Mum's lawyer first thing tomorrow." Sarah paused the recording. "Mum, they're going to find out you changed the will tomorrow." "Perfect," I told her. "That means it's time for the final phase." On Thursday morning at 9 o'clock, Michael and Rebecca showed up at Smith & Associates' office. Harold had told me they had an appointment for 9 o'clock and 30 minutes, but they arrived early, clearly anxious to begin the process of claiming their inheritance. "Good morning," Michael said to the receptionist. "I'm Michael Johnson, and this is my wife Rebecca. We have an appointment to review my mother's will, Mary Johnson. She passed away the day before yesterday." The receptionist, who was completely informed of our plan, greeted them with the appropriate expression of condolence. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. Let me inform Mr. Smith that you have arrived." Harold came out to greet them personally, and I could see through the building's security cameras that I had legally installed for this specific purpose. His expression was somber but professional. "Michael, Rebecca, please come into my office. I am so sorry for your loss." For the next 15 minutes, Harold carefully explained the basic legal procedures for executing a will. Michael listened intently, but I could see Rebecca was impatient, constantly checking her watch. Finally, Harold opened the file. "Michael, I must tell you that your mother revised her will a few weeks ago." Michael straightened up in his chair. "Revised? What exactly does that mean?" "It means she made some significant changes to her last wishes." Harold paused dramatically before continuing. "According to the current will of Mary Johnson, dated the 20th of this month," Harold looked down at his papers, "she leaves the entirety of her estate to her daughter, Sarah Johnson." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Michael through the camera, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Rebecca had gone completely pale. "The whole inheritance?" Michael finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The whole inheritance. The house, the investments, the bank accounts, everything. To you, she leaves $1, the minimum amount required by law." Rebecca stood up abruptly. "That's impossible. Mary was losing her mind. Anyone could see that." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Do you have medical evidence of any cognitive decline? Because I can assure you that when Mary made these changes, she underwent a full mental capacity evaluation. She passed with perfect marks." Michael found his voice. "Mr. Smith, there has to be some mistake. My mother and I were very close. Sarah didn't even visit her." "Michael," Harold said gently, "your mother left a letter explaining her reasons for this change. Would you like me to read it?" Without waiting for a response, Harold opened a sealed envelope. In a clear, firm voice, he read my words. "To my son, Michael. For years, I thought you had inherited the values your father and I tried to instill in you. I recently discovered I was wrong. Love cannot coexist with greed, and you have chosen greed. I hope the $1 I leave you serves to remind you of the value of a mother who loved too much and trusted too much. When Harold finished reading, Rebecca was crying. But they weren't tears of pain or regret. They were tears of pure fury. "This isn't going to stand," she screamed. "We're going to fight this. We're going to prove that crazy old woman was mentally incompetent." And that's when Harold smiled. "Rebecca, there's something else you need to know." He pressed a button on his desk, and his office door opened. It was my turn to make my final entrance. When I walked through Harold's office door, the silence that followed was absolute. Michael and Rebecca were sitting with their backs to the door, but I could see the exact moment Michael recognized my voice when I said softly, "Hello, son." Rebecca was the first to turn around. Her face went through a fascinating progression of emotions: confusion, shock, realization, and finally pure terror. Michael moved as if he were underwater, slowly turning in his chair until his eyes met mine. "Mum?" His voice was barely a broken whisper. "But you're—" "The doctor said exactly what I asked him to say," I replied, walking calmly to the empty chair in front of Harold's desk. "Please, sit down. We have a lot to talk about." Rebecca had stood up, visibly shaking. "This is a cruel joke. You can't put us through this. We thought you had died." "Yes," I said, settling into my chair and clasping my hands in my lap. "And in the 24 hours since my supposed death, you have demonstrated exactly who you really are." Michael finally found his voice. "Mum, I don't understand what's happening here." Harold cleared his throat. "Michael, your mother has been aware of your true intentions for several weeks. Everything that has happened since then has been carefully documented." "Documented?" Rebecca's voice rose an octave. "What do you mean, documented?" I took my phone from my purse and placed it on Harold's desk. "Rebecca, would you like to hear the conversation you had 3 weeks ago about how I'm too old for my own money?" I pressed play, and Rebecca's voice filled the office. "Mary is already 66. She's too old to spend that amount of money. $1 million wasted on an old lady who barely leaves her house." Rebecca slumped into her chair as if someone had let all the air out of her lungs. Michael looked at her with an expression I had never seen before: horror mixed with realization. "There's more," I continued, pulling out a second recorder. "This is from when you thought I was sedated in the hospital." Michael's voice filled the silence. "If Mom is starting to have health problems, we need to make sure everything is sorted out before things get worse." Michael went pale. "Mum, I was worried about you. I wanted to make sure you were protected." "Protected?" My voice remained calm, but I felt a coldness I had never experienced before. "Michael, in that conversation you talked about documenting my confusion to use against me later. You talked about speeding up the will process. You didn't mention my well-being even once." Harold intervened. "And then there's the evidence from yesterday and today." He turned on his computer monitor, showing the security recordings from my house. There were Michael and Rebecca, barely hours after my supposed death, frantically searching through my financial documents. "This was taken yesterday at 9 o'clock and 15 minutes in the morning," Harold explained, less than 3 hours after they supposedly received the news of Mary's death. On the screen, Rebecca could clearly be seen checking my jewelry box while Michael searched my financial files. There were no tears, no grief, only a systematic search for valuable assets. "And this one," Harold continued, switching to another recording, "is from this morning, when they were discussing speeding up the funeral to avoid complications." Rebecca stood up abruptly. "This is cheating. You set us up." "Yes," I admitted unapologetically. "I set you up. because I needed to be absolutely sure who you really were before making permanent decisions about my life and my money. Michael had remained silent, but I could see tears forming in his eyes. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a pang of the old maternal pain, but then I remembered his recorded words about documenting my confusion, and the pang vanished. "Mum," he finally said, his voice broken, "I know this looks bad, but you have to understand. I love you." "You love me, Michael?" I took another recorder from my purse. "This is your phone conversation with the funeral home yesterday." His own voice echoed in the room. "I'd like to arrange something simple. She would have wanted something modest." "Michael," I said softly, "your father and I saved specifically for our funerals because we wanted dignified ceremonies. You knew that. But apparently you decided you could save money on my final farewell too." Tears started rolling down Michael's cheeks, but I no longer cared. I had cried too many of my own tears over the past few weeks. Rebecca, who had been silent for several minutes, suddenly exploded. "All right. Yes, we wanted your money, but you're 66 years old. What are you going to do with $1 million? We are young. We have a whole life ahead of us. We have a baby on the way." "Ah," I said, feeling a cold smile form on my lips. "The baby? Yes, I heard you're expecting. Congratulations." I turned to Harold. "Harold, could you explain to Michael and Rebecca the legal implications of what they have attempted to do?" Harold opened a thick folder. "Of course. Michael, Rebecca, what you have attempted to do over the past few weeks constitutes several potential crimes: undue influence on an older adult, attempted financial fraud, and conspiracy to obtain power of attorney under false pretenses." Rebecca turned pale. "Crimes? But we didn't do anything illegal." "You attempted to manipulate Mary into signing legal documents transferring control of her finances based on false representations about her mental capacity," Harold explained. "That is fraud. You documented your plans to create false evidence of mental incompetence. That is conspiracy." Michael found his voice. "Are you going to press charges against us?" I looked at my son, this man I had raised with so much love and sacrifice, and I felt something I never thought I would feel toward him: complete indifference. "No," I finally said. "I'm not going to press charges." The visible relief on their faces was almost comical. "But," I continued, "you are also not going to receive a single penny from me ever again. Sarah will receive everything when I truly die. You two are going to have to learn to live with the consequences of your decisions." Michael leaned forward. "Mum, please. We can fix this. We can go to family therapy. We can—" "Michael," I cut him off. "Do you know what the moment that hurt me the most in all of this was?" He shook his head, tears falling freely now. "It was when I heard that you knew Sarah had been pushed away from our family, and not only did you do nothing to stop it, but you used it as evidence that you were the better child." I stood up, feeling a freedom I hadn't experienced in years. "Sarah is going to be my only heir because Sarah is my only real child. You, Michael, chose to be Rebecca's husband instead of my son." Rebecca made one last desperate attempt. "Mary, think about your grandson. You're going to deny your own grandson a future." I turned to her, feeling a glacial calm. "Rebecca, my grandson is going to have exactly the future that the two of you can provide him with your own work and your own sacrifices, just as I did with my children." I walked toward the door. Then I turned back one last time. "Michael, for 25 years after your father died, every decision I made was based on what would be best for you and Sarah. I gave up trips, house renovations, a social life, all to ensure you had a secure future. Apparently, that sacrifice meant nothing to you. Mum, he began, but I cut him off with a gesture. The next time you want to know about my health or my well-being, you can ask Sarah. She will be the only one who has information about me from now on. I left Harold's office, feeling as if I had released a weight I had been carrying for years. In the parking lot, Sarah was waiting for me in her car. "How did it go?" she asked as I got into the passenger seat. "Liberating," I told her as we drove toward her house, where I would stay until I decided what to do with my life. I thought about the future. I was 66 years old, in perfect health, and had $1 million that I could now spend exactly as I wished. "Sarah," I said, "what do you think about taking that trip to Europe I had always wanted to do?" My daughter smiled. "I think it's time you live for yourself, Mum." Yes, I thought, looking out the window at the midday blue sky. It was finally time.